Hi, Dr. David.
Hi, Tammy. Good to see you and everyone else tonight. Thanks for joining us, everybody. As Tammy mentioned, I'm Dr. David Fawcett. I'm substituting for Dr. Rob, who's traveling tonight for the holidays. And I do one of these on my own on Wednesday nights. However, it won't be happening this Christmas, 2 days from now, but we'll be back in business on New Year's Day, on the 1st. Just real briefly, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a sex therapist, a sexologist, done addictions for 30 years in recovery myself, and have been really thrilled to collaborate with Dr. Rob on building this program at Seeking Integrity. Rob comes from more of a sex addiction approach. I come from more of a substance abuse approach. And the last 20 years or so, I've worked with what we call paired or fused substance abuse and sexual behavior. Typical example would be cocaine and methamphetamine plus sex, or any time we see those two merge together. And we do get quite a few clients at Seeking Integrity that do that. I'll just do shameless self-plugs. My book is Lust, Men, and Meth, The Gay Man's Guide to Sex and Recovery, which deals with that chemsex phenomenon among gay men. And I do have a documentary out called Crystal City, which follows some gay men in recovery from meth in New York City, and that's out on Amazon Prime.
And I've had the opportunity to watch that documentary, and I was fortunate to actually be sitting in your company, and it was a very powerful documentary on on the issue. And I want to tag on with the co-occurring. We see clients that have alcohol and sex addiction, opiates and sex addiction, or the stimulants and sex addiction. And,
right.
I don't think there's a better place
or
to
marijuana and sex addiction.
Yes. Yeah. I was gonna say that one's actually, become more prevalent as well too. So
right.
I always say any substance that's co-occurring with sex addiction, porn addiction, or, some people just identify as kind of intimacy disorder. That's what Seeking Integrity can help. And Dr. David, I started a moment before we hit record, but is one of the clinicians that actually is working with the client. So he and Dr. Rob are both experts in the field, and they're not just figureheads on the website. They actually are doing work with clients. So
I'll be there all next week, for example.
Yes, there you go. So, okay. So this person writes that she has a loved one who is in treatment at Seeking Integrity Los Angeles right now. He's not been sober for 90 days, so I'm wondering if he'll be able to master sobriety. And my question is, how will his life change? So that's a great question. And what do you see happen in the short time that the clients are with us?
That's a great question. I think I would say when people are out in the world, active in their addiction, they're kind of in a bubble. They're kind of in their own zone and space. And I've been there. I know you kind of lose perspective. You don't understand the impact your actions have on your loved ones or your boss or other people in your life. One becomes very selfish. The thinking becomes skewed. Everything makes sense in a weird way. Even really bad behavior makes sense. And I think to come to a place like Seeking Integrity or any residential treatment program, there's a couple days when there's this like adjustment period, but I think with some of the help of partners, with some of the help of the therapists and the peers, it all kind of comes together to kind of break that bubble. And I think a lot of times one of the big realizations is that belief system of denial and rationalizations and making sense and all that kind of falls away, and the person kind of sees their behavior for what it was, and that's that moment that we call acceptance. And that's really the very first step that we're looking for. And in very rare occasions, people have that before they come to us. I think sometimes there's always a glimmer. They won't get on the plane and come to us. But I think that is really a critical piece that to just understand, whoa, this is a bigger thing than I thought. This is impacting people that I love in more harmful ways than I ever imagined. And they start to get some realization. Beyond that, there's so many different things that happen. We have people do a timeline so that they look over their whole life and look at not only their sexual acting out, but their relationships, what are major life events, and they kind of put it all together on big pieces of paper, and it kind of comes together, and they start to see patterns. What happens when? Very often we see the role of trauma, for example. and how trauma has affected people's lives as they develop. So there's all kinds of insight, there's knowledge, and maybe most important is this ability to start getting out of our head, which is where addiction lives, and really starting to connect with people who aren't afraid to confront them, especially if they're peers, if they see that they're trying to pull a fast one. But also it's this incredible connection that I have found is essential to recovery. And it's kind of a springboard into recovery. So my hope for every client is when they leave us, they feel how it feels to be connected, to be supported, and to have hope. I think so many of our clients come in with, they're discouraged, they've tried this before, their lives are a shambles, they're hurting other people, and they don't have much hope. And I think when they start to see that people can do this and move past it, and not just survive, but rebuild a life that was better than they had before, that's what it's all about. That's what keeps me waking up every day and coming back, frankly, to see those miracles. And there are miracles. So, everybody's different, but I think those are the kind of the major things that I look for. Tammy, you've been around a long time too. What do you think?
Well, a lot, I concur with a lot of what you said. I will do the caveat of, because you kind of said all treatment, and I'm like, qualified treatment. There's too many people that, and we've had people that have contacted us that are in treatment in another place and they weren't getting what they needed. So if somebody really is going to a competent place that has the skills, they need, and particularly for co-occurring, there really aren't great, there aren't a lot of great choices. So for chemical dependency, there's lots of good choices. For sex addiction, there's fewer choices. And obviously, we know what we're doing with this and believe in this. Yes, life-changing. I always tell everybody we aren't going to fix everything in the short time that they're with us. But I think the biggest thing, there's lots of biggest things, but the breaking through the denial and breaking through the shame. And so like you talked about the peer and the confrontation when necessary, but support and help, from the clinical staff as well. So you balancing those things. But addiction is very compartmentalized. We wouldn't be able to act out in our addiction if we actually paid attention to hurting loved ones. So we have to focus on, we're just going to act out, we're going to act out, we're going to act out at all costs, and even justify, well, no one will know and it won't hurt anybody and whatever. So there's all, like you said, the mistaken belief system, that we can help them break through. But we also give them a plan. And people sometimes ask me, what are the statistics, with people? And how do you say, for the people that come and do the things that are, part of the program and then follow the aftercare plan that is given to them, I don't know, but I bet it's 100% or near, for the people that come and then go home and kind of shove that on the shelf and go, well, that was interesting, but I'm going to keep doing everything the same way I did. That really speaks to their motivation. So, I share this with people coming in too. I remember when I went to treatment, I was a lot younger and I was terrified. I was fearful that it wouldn't work for me. I was also fearful that it would work for me because I did not know how to live without acting in my addiction. I could not imagine, I couldn't handle life, without having the addictive behavior. So how was I going to get from where I was so uncomfortable in my own skin and not having any kind of tools to this place where all of a sudden I have to stop all of those things and then what? So it's terrifying from that standpoint. But, I always hope that I'm giving people hope that if they just come and let the magic happen. I think if they let the process happen, they can get that glimmer of hope, and I do hope that they go, that's enough to keep me doing the next thing, and then I'm going to do the next right thing. I talk about this a lot. I'm going to do the next right thing. That's all I have to do is do the next right thing. So we give them connections. We like when people are on this platform. We give them other, connections. We give them a plan. And we support, we love it when the loved ones are on this. We look at everything from a prodependent standpoint. If you haven't had a chance to pick up the book or listen to the podcast, I'd invite you to do so. It's, it's a very different lens than you're part of the problem. You're an enabler. You're finger wagging,
Right,
that's
right.
not what we look at. We really look at is, gosh, you love this person. They're struggling, they're broken, but how can we support you in the trauma that you've experienced?
Right.
We want to be there and be, part of that. And for the partners, if you don't have a qualified therapist, let me help you find somebody in your area to support you on the journey as well. So hopefully that answers a little bit of it. It's not a miracle cure. It's not like, okay, everything gets whitewashed and it's all better. It's not, but it's the beginning of a journey.
It's the beginning.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a lifelong journey. I've been in recovery, a fair amount of time. In fact, I got invited there's an Elkathon tomorrow and there's an old timers meeting, and I got invited to participate in that. So I said, you keep showing up long enough, you get invited to be an old timer. So, but I'm grateful, incredibly grateful. And I would, I would not, my best day out in my addictions, and there were multiple, I would not trade for even a hard day in recovery, because I know this is so much more connected and more real and honest, and and the people in my life I genuinely care about. It's amazing, and it's not all rainbows and lollipops and unicorns, but it's true and it's meaningful, and I care about that. So,
Yeah.
okay. Next question. I am a woman in SLAA, 1 year sober. I'm single and getting ready to develop a dating plan. I love that you're getting a plan. I'm attending a singles mixer tomorrow and I'm going by myself. I'd like to meet people and mingle. I really only have been around recovery people for the better part of a year, so I'm a little nervous, actually very nervous about going and interacting. I feel the anorexic side of myself a lot. Any tips for approaching this and maybe even having a good time? Imagine that. I love this.
Well, first of all, congratulations on a year. That's a big
Yes.
deal. And this is a hard time, I think, of year for singles and especially for recovery. I mean, there's kind of overlapping things there that make it hard. But it's also a time to kind of celebrate and time of new beginnings. And I really love your kind of adventurous spirit that you're going out there to do that. I think to really, I'm a big believer in grounding oneself and setting an intention. So I would really make sure that you feel balanced with your feet on the ground and that you are solid and you have your resources in place, whatever kind of higher power that may be, or all that kind of with you. And I also think that it would be a good idea, a couple of things. One, if you have affirmations, to go into a setting like that with affirmations. An affirmation is just simply a positive first-person statement. I am worthy of meeting some fabulous people, or whatever it may be, in your case, that fits and sounds right for you. And also, sometimes these kind of situations, at least for me, early on in recovery, any kind of social event was really caused a lot of anxiety. And so I did a thing that we call bookending, where I would call somebody, call my sponsor, call a friend before I go to this event, and I call afterwards just to check in. It's a great way to kind of, it contained the experience, and it helped me kind of not feel like I was going to slip away or do something wrong, or just not connect and be able to process with someone later. But I would go in, beyond that, I would go with an open mind. You've been doing this a year. I think in the first year in recovery, our positive, wonderful qualities start to emerge. I would just be you. Don't try to be there for anybody else. Don't try to have an agenda in terms of meeting someone or meeting the right person. Be open to what the universe has in store for you. And just know that you've done all this work on yourself, and all that I trust the beautiful qualities are going to shine through, and people will be drawn to you. But just don't feel pressure. Don't. The other thing too, I would say, for me, I'm talking out loud, is don't get too much up in your head. Don't try to figure this all out. I would just go with whatever you're feeling and go trust your gut. Is this a good thing? Is not. If you meet someone, do they look like they're fun, interesting, whatever the criteria is, fine. If you get some, this is not the person for me vibes, no reason to hang out there any further, but just go have fun and have a good time. And sometimes also, just to go back to the skills and techniques piece, it might be good to go sit with someone from your recovery group. That's the other thing that is often done well. And I can't remember if you said, is this a program mixer?
A singles mixer. It doesn't say recovery. So
Okay. So that might be a good idea to bring someone who is in your recovery group with you, just for support, or I would just stay in touch with people by phone, that book, anything, whatever it takes. But I wouldn't, the dating plans all really start because a lot of us with these kind of addictions have a lot of fear, a lot of intimacy issues, and it's a big deal to actually have coffee with someone or do anything more, let alone date. So I would just have no expectation, just go to have a good time and see what happens. But good for you for getting your foot in the water and getting out there. I think it's wonderful.
And I love it. Have a plan. So even if you aren't with a recovery person, there's probably a recovery person you can text even while you're there going like, I'm really uncomfortable. But I was thinking too, a couple things. My suggestion is put a smile on your face. If you are smiling, you are inviting people in, and that can, because if I'm all closed in, or looking really nervous, I'm less likely to attract people. But the other thing is, I bet there's a whole bunch of people that are going to be there just like you that are a little nervous to be there. So, it's one of those, so it's one of those things where it isn't like everybody else has their act all together. It's a singles mixer. It's a great opportunity. I always love meeting people. That's me. I like meeting people. I like finding out about them and things like that. It's easy to ask questions with the other person so you can kind of get to know them better. And then like Dr. David said, if it's like I don't even want them in my friend aura circle, then mingle away. So, but yeah.
I'd add one more thing. I'd be really aware of that critical self-talk that we all carry around in our head. It's like, who do you think you are? Everybody else is having a good time. You'll never have whatever the chatter is. Just turn the volume down and have a good time.
Yeah. So I think I love that you've got a dating plan. You're doing lots of right things with this. So, I love that you're putting yourself out there. I think you're going to find some interesting people and, have a good time. So somebody commented, we have no other questions right now. So if you have questions, please ask. Somebody commented though that this person had just recently returned home after being with us at Seeking Integrity. And he says, it was life-changing for me. I am so happy and thankful that I did it. So thank you for the affirmation. It really is, I had a partner that reached out, I bet it was a week and a half ago or something like that. And she commented, she said, I don't know what you guys did. The man I got back was different than the man I sent. And she said it was life-changing. And she I won't share details, but she shared, how their relationship had really changed. He had been with us during the summertime. So they'd been, it was a few months down the road, but it was, I got goosebumps again, just sharing that little bit with you. So it really is meaningful. So
that's what it's all about.
Okay. So this is from someone, my husband and I have been together almost 20 years. Our sex was amazing until it came to a complete stop. I now know that he had been attracted to trans women, has been acting out with trans, and more recently with cross-dressers for more than a decade. He seems to be unable to define his sexual orientation. All I hear from him is he is not aroused by me. Can one's orientation change? Will sobriety bring him clarity about his sexuality?
It's a great question. And it's one that is quite common, actually. A lot of times people will have a certain attraction that is disturbing to them or their partner, like this. And they think, well, maybe is that addiction? Is that something that can be treated? And to take it back a little bit, sex addiction is not about who you interact with or what you do. It's kind of in how you do it. It's in the volume. It's in the compulsivity. It's in the use of sex as not for sex but to numb. And so one of the things we don't do, can't do at Seeking Integrity is change those kind of orientations, change things that are, for example, if we had a client who was very upset, had some gay attractions, and that's not something we can really impact. Now, what we can do is help the client clarify what's going on, to really sort out what's addiction, what is the addictive behavior from what is there elsewhere, and then really help the client kind of understand what some of those are. Oftentimes the single biggest disturbing piece is the emotional feelings attached, both on the part of the client and the partner. And so to really help both parties process those feelings is going to be really important. Now, if oftentimes we see those kind of behaviors where there's a particularly an orientation or a fetish or a kink or something that's not been part of the normal sex life, sometimes it's really all wound up with the addictive process. And that can sometimes include meth or cocaine or just sex addiction. And we certainly want to look at the addictive processes, but I think it would be unfair to say that we're going to change that or undo that in any kind of way. And now sometimes those are distractions and they do kind of fade, and as the couple gets back on track, but that the changing in orientation is something that we can't do really per se. Now, if there's a particular fetish or kink, if that's disturbing, if that's related to addiction, that's something we do look at, because that's going to be unhealthy for the person to continue to engage in that behavior. But when it comes down to orientation, or the kind of individuals or the kind of sex that's involved, that gets a little trickier to try to intervene on per se. So I would just say hang in there. We'll get more clarification. We will see what's really involved and go from there.
Yeah, and I think you've pointed out how complex this is, you know, and it goes back to my earlier statement about the right treatment center. You know, sending a client to a drug and alcohol center that doesn't have any training to address this is a recipe for disaster. So this is complicated. It's complex, and we really want to. I think one of the things that Seeking Integrity Los Angeles does probably better than almost anybody, I don't know others, but is the assessment, really figuring out what's going on for that client. They're not, it isn't, this is what we do. It's like, we really take in the information. We assess people before they arrive. You know, we do it, it's like an hour and a half for intake, and then assessments on top of that. And then they get there and there's more timeline. And I mean, it's very comprehensive, because we want that individual to leave with their aftercare plan and, you know, what their sobriety looks like. You know, we talk about the 3-circle plan and what's in each of the different circles, you know, for an individual client. And there will be some commonalities, you know, within sex addiction, but there's a lot of difference too. Whereas with, you know, alcohol or drugs, it's abstinence. Well, that's not the same, you know, with sex addiction or food addiction. You know, I mean, it's really finding what's going to be a healthy choice for each client. So that's why it's really complicated. So, you know, like we've shared, we want to do the best job for each individual client.
And I think sometimes we've had spouses in similar situations be concerned that we're going to kind of somehow conspire with the client and move him away from the partner. And that's really, that's up to you too, as a couple, to really walk through and work through and talk about and deal with. We can't make any decisions for you in that regard in terms of what happens or what decisions you make down the road. The fact that you had, as you say, a really robust sex life is a really good sign to me. As a sex therapist, there's a lot there. And there may be these other things floating around the edges, but I think there's a lot there to work with that's going to be quite healthy and quite good. So
yeah, and I my experiences, and you have far more experience than me, but my experience is too that, you know, even if I have an attraction to something, I can still choose what I, you know, who and whom I have sex with. It isn't, well, because I have this attraction, I've got to go off and do this.
Right.
So it, there's a lot more to intimacy. I mean, sex. There's lots of sex addicts that have sex with no intimacy. So what we're really looking at is the intimacy, and a lot of times the sex addicts are avoiding intimacy. So, but they really, they care about their loved one. It's just so compartmentalized, like I mentioned before. So there's this big disconnect, and I think Seeking Integrity can help them reconnect and figure out, help them figure out, not us tell them, but help
Exactly.
them figure out what is right for them. So,
Right. And the couple, I would say
yeah,
for
yeah,
both.
yeah. And them meaning the more global. Yes,
Right.
yeah. Should clarify. So,
Yeah.
okay. Next question. Oh yeah, this is not conversion therapy, nor would I want that. I guess I was hoping that he will come out with clarity as to what he wants, and that's been our experience.
I would say that's going to be the case. More clarity for sure. And if only that we're reducing the fog of addiction, which kind of confuses everything because things become compulsive. People are acting out even if they don't want to. There's another thing we haven't talked about here is that with addiction, there's something called tolerance. People start wanting different, novel, more stimulating, exotic things. And oftentimes we see people kind of drift into kind of different tastes out of because they're trying to get that intensity that they started out with the addiction. So yeah, I think we'll have a lot more information, a lot more clarity for sure.
Yeah, and this wasn't part of the question, but we see that with porn addiction too. It's because there's always new and more, and bam, bam, bam. There's so much that's hitting the brain all the time that it's the constant pursuit.
Right. Exactly.
Other questions, comments?
It's a quiet group tonight.
I know. I'm grateful you're here. So we appreciate it. So let me think. So we've shared in other webinars, you've talked about, so we're talking about co-occurring, and actually it was on a podcast. You were talking about alcohol and the rise in use of alcohol, and you have talked about how meth, there are more deaths from meth than opiates in many states, and it's kind of underreported and undermentioned. Can you talk a little bit about, since we've got some time, let's talk.
Yeah, and while we love your questions, but I'll talk for a second about this. We all recognize the opioid epidemic that has been really devastating a good bit of the country. And it's gotten a lot of attention, and rightly so, because I think it's really necessary to get that attention. The epidemic that I worry about that isn't being so recognized is methamphetamine. And we know that meth is hitting multiple populations, certainly been a common drug in the gay community for 20 years, but it also is very common among women, especially families in the Midwest, in areas where there's a lot of economic deprivation, where parents are seeing that their kids are going to have a lower quality of life than they did because of all the factories have closed down, and there's kind of a sense of hopelessness. And meth is this great numbing agent, like a lot of drugs. And so people use it to kind of check out from their feelings. And so I think anywhere we see people having that sense of hopelessness, we're seeing meth. And for the first time this past year, we saw meth overdoses and meth seizures by the Drug Enforcement Agency administration actually surpass opioids. Mm-hmm. And so it's this big, huge epidemic that's just devastating people's lives. And I personally don't feel it's getting enough attention because opioids, which is also a devastating epidemic, is just getting all the news. It's like people can't chew gum and walk at the same time, but we need to. And I worry about that because meth is just devastating in a lot of ways. And interestingly, with methamphetamine, because it is such a supercharging drug for sexual stimulation, we've seen that among gay men particularly, but we also see it among women. And it's kind of an underreported phenomenon as well. So it's a lot of, it's breaking up a lot of families, it's contributing to sex work, it's really causing a lot of issues for people. So I do worry about that. So something to be aware of in your own community.
Well, yes, and I'm with you that it's underreported. Well, even like I mentioned, alcohol. You talked about there was a large number increase in alcoholism, and that doesn't get reported. It's like that's just commonplace now. So it's a way bigger thing when people come to seeking integrity. Sometimes they'll say, I'm just coming for sex or porn addiction. And I never bank on that. That's all, because it's like, this is so in the side wings. It's not really an issue. This is what's really causing me problem, is wrecking my relationship. But, and then you start unpacking it all and you go, oh, wait, you're actually using alcohol and cocaine and whatever else you're doing. It just hasn't hit your radar as this is part of the problem yet. So,
right. Yeah.
So next question is, we're 2 years in recovery with my husband's sex porn addiction with individual and occasional couples therapy. I immediately jumped in with both feet to read, listen to whatever I can to help me understand his mindset, my own culpability, and how best to help him. Why doesn't he seem to do the same without me cajoling? It's so hurtful that it doesn't seem important enough to him to do the same. He's finally read Out of the Doghouse 2 months after I asked him to read it, and says he's found some helpful points, but there's never any expounding on what they are when I probe. Am I expecting too much to aid in my own feeling of safety and healing?
Great question, a great comment. And 2 years in recovery is a long time. I think this dynamic we do see sometimes where the addict is still in that kind of feet dug in kind of thing. And there's what I get from your description there is somewhat of a lack of willingness. I think sometimes addicts go only so far, and then they dig in and still kind of try to do it their way. And I just get the sense that there's been a lack of total surrender and acceptance there. And I think so many couples with sex addiction and porn addiction fall into this dynamic of the partner really kind of pushing, wanting the person to do something, and the addict putting on the brakes and resisting. And that's kind of a dance couples do sometimes. I'm sorry you're in this dynamic. I think it's really must be painful because you're obviously invested in this. It is something we see quite often where the partners are much more informed and willing to do a lot of the work than sometimes the addict is. So two things. I guess one thing is to take care of you, make sure you're getting the support you need, whether with your own fellowships, your own therapy, all the support, the reading, because at some point you're powerless over what he does. And you can be a good partner, you can kind of collaborate, you can push to some extent, but sometimes I know from couples work that the harder you push, the more he's going to resist. And so that sometimes is kind of a dead end dynamic. So you might want to try to just set clear boundaries on what your expectations are. I would really try to process this in the context of therapy. You mentioned occasional couples therapy. I found that couples therapists can be really helpful sometimes in breaking through this dynamic of resistance and in terms of helping guide the couples and really get out some of the feelings. I also suspect there's probably some unexpressed feelings there, whether it's shame, hurt, fear, anger, some of the basic stuff that is there under the surface that probably needs to be talked about, and that often has to be guided in a therapeutic setting. But I understand how painful this position must be because you're really working at it, and with all the best intentions, it's a couple years down the road, you have every right to expect to be in a different place. And so I think at some point, you can only push him so far. I think I would take care of you, set your expectations, set your boundaries, and then kind of enlist the help of professionals who can guide you both to do this. And by the way, we recommend that both the partner and the addict both have therapists and 2 separate therapists. It's really important that you have an advocate in your own corner. It gets really tricky and murky, and too many boundaries are kind of mushy when the one therapist is trying to do this all. And so I'd really encourage you to get your own therapist, have him get his own therapist, and then the couples therapist, and I know this sounds like an awful lot of therapy, but a couples therapist should ideally be a third person, not his, not yours, but the client for a couples therapist is the couple. And so, and that may be the most important one for you guys to focus on now, because I think you're kind of in this deadlock, and I think this kind of push-pull thing just causes problems, more problems sometimes. So I'd really encourage maybe a therapist to help you break that deadlock. But you're right on track. Your feelings are not out of line. I mean, everything you're saying is right on the money. So he's the one that's going to have to do something. I'm not sure that you can make him do that, but he's the one that's ultimately going to have to do that.
Yeah, I chime in with what you say. The only thing, sometimes couples have his therapist, her therapist, and then the two do conjoint couples therapy, and that
Yes,
works really well too. But
that's
again,
right. That's almost better.
yeah, because then you've got an advocate for both of you, but that helps with the dynamics too. But yeah, definitely. I got stuck on my own culpability, and I want to. There's nothing you can do or not do that will make him, act out or not act out. There isn't culpability. You can set healthy boundaries. You can do things for you. You can say, I want to improve in this area and all of that kind of stuff. But I wanted to point that out, because that like when I was reading it, I almost got stuck on that. But I appreciate that you're really looking at all of this. I understand the frustration. I probably would be whapping him on the head with the Out of the Doghouse book. And then the other thing I got caught on was we're 2 years in recovery, and so I look at sobriety is I'm just stopping the behavior, and then I look at recovery, which is like I'm really doing the work. I'm doing my recovery work, and this is just a short share, so I get it. But I'd be curious as to if he's doing all this, if he's just going to one therapy session a week. And barely reading Out of the Doghouse, which I would think he'd be very motivated to have things change. Because honestly, if somebody's always like frustrated and mad at me, I want to do something so it's different, because like that's just not, that's not helpful, especially if I know that I'm the source of it. So, but I'm also going like, okay, where is he in the 12 steps? Is he working a 12-step recovery program? What all is he doing? Because I talk about this a lot, but there's a lot of people that even going to meetings, they just warm a seat, and those are the people that don't really get recovery. They warm a seat. They go, oh, that was a really interesting meeting. Heard lots of good stuff. Great, and you're in recovery for today, and you probably, aren't going to act out, but you aren't really changing stuff. Where stuff changes is working the steps. It's the, in the big book, they call it into action. And you have to, Dr. Rob has talked a bunch of times that for a behavior problem, you have to have behavioral changes. And so, you're never going to think your way out of addiction. It just won't happen.
Right.
So
one more thing I'd like to add
sure.
to that. The lessons, am I expecting too much to aid in my own feeling of safety and healing? And I think ultimately, you're going to have to create your own sense of healing and safety. And that may or may not be with him. I mean, in terms of his participation in it. Obviously, a couple needs that from each other eventually. But I think at this point, given what you've described where he's at, I think it's really going to be important for you to take your safety and healing into your own hands and make it kind of independent of what he does or doesn't do. So you can kind of create that to the best of your ability. And that means getting support for yourself, making your own connections, getting a support group, getting people that get you and you can talk to, and getting all that support in a really robust way.
Yeah, and they're online. We have the Betrayed Partners support group, so we'd encourage you to join those. Consider too the couples healing from betrayal workshop.
Yeah.
Those are offered once a month. The next one is January 17th through 19th. It's half full. There's only 4 couples that it's maxed out at 4 couples. But if you go to Seeking Integrity, you'll see the goals. But it's communication, navigating, the difficult, conflict resolution, grieving our losses together, which is like you guys have lost, the fantasy of the relationship you thought you had, because addiction intervened. And so you each have losses, and then you have the loss of the relationship as you thought it was, but you can create a new relationship. So there can be a new path, but it still takes some grieving work. So Anyway, consider that. If that's something you want more information on, let me know. So I'm fully committed to the fact I am a sex addict, and I'm doing everything I can to follow through with my recovery plans, and also be empathetic with my spouse's recovery and healing. I have lied so much throughout my marriage, my words are meaningless. When my spouse is triggered from the trauma I have caused, saying I'm really sorry has no meaning. Obviously, it depends on the situation, but do you have some suggestions for what to say or do?
Wow, good for you.
Yeah. Out of the doghouse. That's my
Yeah,
first. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. That book, Out of the Doghouse, is going to be really helpful for you because it just has so many practical steps that you can take and apply in this situation, because that's exactly where you're at. Um, One of the things that we always talk about at Seeking Integrity is that the speed of um, the healing process is a little different. Sometimes I think the sex addicts almost always want that trust of their partner to come back quicker and have the healing occur faster, because they feel quite different. That they feel like they've changed, and and hopefully that behavior can be sustained. The partners, have really experienced a lot of betrayal and trauma that's often, almost in every case, I think, underestimated by the addict, like the level of impact of trauma that they've caused and created. And so I think it's so important for you, first of all, to have that awareness, and I really congratulate you on that, for understanding that and seeing what you might have caused. And that's something that we try to work also on in treatment with letters of impact and that sort of thing. So I would really say communication is one of the key things for you to do. And that's simply to make sure you understand what's being said. There's a wonderful couples dialogue approach where, because couples, when they start to talk and argue so much back and forth, you're preparing your rebuttal before you really hear what the other person has said. And so in this particular therapy, the listener has to repeat what was just said until they get it right. And until the partner says, yeah, you got that right. And then they can answer. But it just kind of slows the whole thing down. But I would really try to stay present, try to stay emotionally connected. I really like 10 minutes, doesn't have to be a long time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes each day to check in. And I ask my couples to sit down, turn off the phones, hold hands, make eye contact, and talk. And I think that just that communication really starts to establish some trust and to sort of reestablish the connection. Sex addiction just severs connections. And what you're doing is trying to put those together, and sometimes they can't be. But it sounds like in your case, I'm very hopeful about what you're describing. And I think that is about kind of putting it back together, and it's slow, and it's frustratingly slow sometimes. But I really just hang in there, be consistent, be empathetic, be open to feelings. I think in the case a couple of questions ago, it sounds like there wasn't much dialogue, not much communication, not much sharing of feelings. And I would really share your feelings. I'm sure there's shame, there's grief. Tammy just made a wonderful point about the loss. When something like addiction hits a couple, one of the things that dies is the fantasy of what we were. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to be great again together, but couples have to talk about that. That's something really bad happened here. And so we have to process that, let it go, and that makes room for some healing to occur. So just be willing to talk, be willing to share your feelings, be honest, open, and just keep doing what you're doing. I think you sound really good.
And I concur. And I was thinking too, it's like, and when she's really struggling with things, even sharing, it's really difficult for me to hear this. I want to hear this, but it's difficult for me to hear this. That's a different place than, well, I don't know, whatever, I mean, like not being defensive about it. And then taking that to your sponsor or therapist or whatever, so that you can do that. And I don't know if she's gotten, it is very traumatizing. And I often recommend that the spouse's partners get support to process their trauma. And there are trauma techniques. We've talked about EMDR and somatic experience before. but those are just several of them, but they can be helpful for just reducing the physical reaction of the of the trauma. That every time this happens, I have a physical reaction to it. So there are techniques that can help support the partners and spouses. But I love what Dr. David was talking about, is just the 10-minute check-in, and just being present and being willing to be uncomfortable. Because if somebody's telling you, I was really triggered by da 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 da, and just I can understand that. So,
And I think sometimes we men have a way of just speaking in shorthand. And I think I'd encourage you to kind of expand on it. And so instead of just a simple, I'm sorry, break it down in a couple sentences. I hear you saying X, Y, Z. I can understand how my behavior made you feel X, Y, Z. Then I'm so sorry. It makes it, it lays it out in a more meaningful way that I think brings our partners along with us when we say that.
I actually, I've hung around enough therapists. I've learned to use what I hear you saying is, and that's been really helpful for me because, and like you said, Dr. David, it's like sometimes somebody clarifies and goes, no, that wasn't really what I meant. Or yes, but, or yes, and, and so I get more information. And information is helpful, even if it's uncomfortable. I would rather know where the person's at, and because they're probably emoting those emotions, so it's easier to, well, it's not easier, but it's healthier for me to just I understand you're upset. May we talk about it? So
Right.
Okay, so my husband watches porn uncontrollably and has acted out for numerous years. When I read the literature, we talk about addiction and the needs for increasing the intensity. How dangerous is it to stay within the addiction and needing that new fix? From my discovery as a detective, I have seen a change in the type of porn he seeks to more younger attraction as T-boys. I also have learned that he himself has cross-dressed and want to be part of the tease porn world.
Yeah, that's a really astute comment and question. One of the things about sex addiction and porn addiction and fused drug and sex addiction, what they all have in common is intensity. And they all work on a neurotransmitter called dopamine, and that requires novelty. And so what's exciting and thrilling and titillating today is going to be less so tomorrow. And so we see this natural escalation of these addictions moving into more intense things to get the same effect. And that intense things can be, rougher, more taboo, more exotic, whatever it might be. And we also see that this gets people into trouble because I did a lecture with the clients today about this very topic where we do see people looking at porn kind of drifting off into, younger and younger ages. Not that they started out as pedophiles or anything like that, but it's exotic, it's different, it's kind of exciting in a way. We see people get into other kind of fetishes and kinks. So this is something that does happen, and there's no happy ending to that. It just keeps escalating in a way that gets very self-destructive. And this is purely a function of a neurotransmitter called dopamine in the brain, which causes this excitement, this like a rush of good feelings. And very quickly, what was exciting, as I said, yesterday won't be exciting, and we need something new and different. And so it's a dangerous trend. And really, the only thing I can recommend for that is to stop the addiction. And the other thing that happens, by the way, and I'll just say because it's important to note, once someone falls into that trap of increasing this need for excitement to just feel aroused or even normal, if we take away the addiction, like we do, there's a period of adjustment when the brain has to kind of reboot or reset. And in that period of adjustment, things that used to be exciting or pleasurable, like our spouses, aren't so much. And I think, or even enjoying life. People get depressed, people get hopeless, the world is kind of gray. And it's a biochemical thing. The brain has shed all these dopamine receptors in the course of trying to deal with all the stimulation from the addiction. We take the addiction away, people fall into this kind of depression and oftentimes lose interest. They lose interest in their partners, in hobbies, in life sometimes. And so that's a temporary phase. So I just want everybody to know that. But this is something where we have to kind of reset, and my message of hope here is that if you talk to long-term couples in recovery, they will tell you that their sex is better than it ever was. They feel more connected. They feel more intimate. There's a much healthier, stronger, robust connection between the two of them. But there is definitely a process between letting go of this need for more and more and more and the healing. And so just do expect that, a period of adjustment. But you're absolutely right on the money with this need for intensity that really drives people into some really dangerous places. I remember a lot of my meth clients that I've talking about, finding themselves in situations with guns to their heads, and like, how did they get there? They're asking themselves, like, where did this come from? And it was this kind of natural progression of seeking more and more dangerous, exotic, exciting, thrilling experiences. So yeah, great question.
So the next one, I am a sex addict that has just begun recovery. I'm doing a poor job of telling my wife what a piece of garbage I am and tell her all the different ways I have betrayed her. I feel like I'm lost because I have done a poor job disclosing everything I have done. I need to give her all the information. I am just doing circles of shame and guilt. I have 20 years of being a piece of garbage. I am just lost and I'm tired of causing her more pain and betrayal. I'm going to my own therapy, couples therapy, and doing 12-step program, but I feel like I'm failing. I don't know what to do.
Wow. Thank you for writing in. A couple things to say about this. One, shame. Addicts just carry immense amounts of shame. In fact, in my experience, personal experience, I had a lot of shame before I ever found addiction. I think shame really is the essential ingredient that leads to addiction. But then it just gets worse because we do so many things that we feel awful about, and we are, that was my kind of mantra, is that I'm a piece of garbage. That was how I lived my life for many years as an addict. And we talk about something called a shame spiral at Seeking Integrity. And that really simply means when you fall into this shame, and I kind of hear it in your words here, it just spirals down into this like churning vat of terrible feelings that really is not productive. It doesn't do anybody any good. If it'll only going to make you sick and just cause ever more distress. So understand that shame is a natural feeling, but it doesn't do you or your wife any good at all. So what I would recommend is really starting to, first of all, talk to your therapist about the phenomenon of disclosure. Because one of the things that's so harmful to partners, I believe, is that this, what we call rolling disclosures, where maybe you get caught and you say, oh, okay, I did this and this and this, but you don't tell her about that and that and that. And then the next time you get caught, you reveal a little bit more, and then you reveal a little bit more. And that is just so traumatic and distressing for the partner who, first of all, their life has been turned upside down. They want to believe this is it. And they deal with that. They try to get back on their feet, and then something else comes along, and then something else comes along. So what's really highly recommended is a formal disclosure. And that really means taking your time about doing that, doing it with a therapist, having your wife have a therapist, and they all come together, all four people, and it's a very formal process. And the idea of a disclosure is not to reveal every single horrible thing you've done that's going to just cause your wife even more pain, but to look at categories of things you've done, the kinds of things you've done. It's honest, it's complete, but it's not brutally honest, if you understand the distinction. And that takes time. We don't do disclosures while people are in treatment. It's too soon. It takes a lot of work to prepare a disclosure. So I'd really try to not blurt out things or tell her things, but really make it a formal process and do it at one time. It's just the kinder, gentler thing to do. And I'd really seek the help of a therapist to do that. And then finally, I think the shame, I mentioned already, there was something else I was going to say. Of course, you're tired of causing the pain and betrayal. I understand that. But I think, the other thing I would just say to this is that sometimes instead of trying to focus totally on her and her needs, I would really look at you right now. Sometimes I think the healing process that ultimately requires healing a couple and healing both of them requires each of you to kind of go to your own corners for a while, and you to do your own work and get an understanding, a clear understanding of what's really been going on with you at an emotional level, not just a behavioral level. And that then your disclosure and your revealing what's going on in your heart, I think is sometimes more informed and more honest, frankly. So I'd really focus on you. I'd encourage Roy to focus on her, and then come together when you both kind of have a little more grounding in this experience, and then do the disclosure. But to kind of do the rolling disclosures is just so traumatic. I'd just, please stop. Don't do that.
Yeah. And I call them vomit disclosures too, wherein it's like, wow, I'm going to tell you everything because you deserve to know everything. And it is very traumatizing, and it's very painful. I'm going to confront the piece of garbage. I bet you didn't grow up going, gosh, I hope I'm an addict. I know I didn't. So what I found out was addiction is a reason. It's not an excuse. I'm still responsible for my own behaviors, but at least there was a reason why I was doing all this crazy things that didn't make any sense or that were hurting people. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to hurt people, and I was doing exactly that. So like I said, not an excuse, but it is a reason. So, if I've shared this with other people, if you had cancer, would she be, would you feel the shame of that? If you had diabetes, would you feel the shame of that? So this is, it's a brain disease, and there are choices, and we can make different choices. So I also, Dr. Rob has talked a lot about if what you're doing isn't working, which it isn't, because otherwise things would be in a different spot for you. So what you're doing right now isn't a high enough level of care. So I don't know if it's doing more of your individual. I also hope you have a qualified therapist, because a general therapist is not trained. Even the nicest person, the best therapist, they're not trained to work with this complicated stuff. So if you've got a great therapist, fantastic. If you need a higher level of care, we have workshops that might be, kind of a jump start to healing that might be helpful for you. Or really, if you're stuck, consider the Seeking Integrity program. But the other thing, the healing couples workshop, might be helpful for the two of you as well. I mean, we've had people that, have been in long-term relationships that, they're really stuck right in the moment, and you each get support, but also as a couple, in those workshops. So we are working towards our disclosure in the next couple of months. My caveat here is I have done my own disclosure and have suffered through it basically all alone, because he has kept an explicit record of almost every encounter that he had in the last 10 plus years. I found these files and have read and learned them, almost everything that he has done during his acting out. He does not know that I know, but is sitting heavy on me, understandably. What should I do? Come clean, or wait to see if they're true and honest during this disclosure? Thoughts on that? I know. I am so sorry. I that is just, that's brutal. And I understand you wanting to look and read, and how compelling that has to be, but how traumatic and painful. So
Right.
thoughts about telling that it's been found?
I hope you have a therapist. I would take it to your therapist and get some consultation on that.
Yeah.
Because that's a heavy duty one. I'd like Tammy, I understand the desire, you want to know, but boy, such pain around that. I'd get help with a therapist and see. I think that probably needs to be woven into the formal disclosure process in some way. But I think how it's done is, there's a couple ways to do it. I would talk to your therapist about that.
And the formal disclosure won't have all the gory details, like Dr. David said. So to be looking for the disclosure to include this little detail, it shouldn't. Like categories, this many people, unprotected sex, spent this much dollars, whatever. It's categories. It's not, on December 23rd of, whatever. I mean, that's not the purpose of it. So you know more of the gory details than the formal disclosure
And I would just recommend, this is my therapist hat here, I would really you say it's sitting heavily on you. Of course it is. I would focus more on dealing with those feelings than verifying every fact and corroborating it with him or his therapist or whatever. But I'd really, those kind of feelings are going to make you sick. That's sitting heavily on you like that. So I would really focus on what you can do to kind of move that out and feel it, express it, and let it go as to the best of your ability. Because those kind of feelings are really, I think, quite dangerous.
Yeah, toxic.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so too. So
Yeah.
we are out of time. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dr. David, for being here
It was fun.
tonight.
Thank you.
You can join him any Wednesday night, except for this one, but
Right.
otherwise on Wednesday nights he's on a line on the same place. So
Yep.
for those of you that celebrate Christmas, I wish you peace and joy as you're moving in through the holidays. And there are podcasts and webinars to listen to previously recorded if you need a little boost. So, but
Great.
we'll see you again next time. Thank you.
Thanks. Happy holidays, Tammy. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.